So the YouTube algorithm is telling me that you like my comments on Pavel and Joe's discussion on kettlebells. So let's continue with this next clip that I have in store for you. I'm gonna react to it in a second. But before we get started, I have a gift for you. 30 days filled with kettlebell workouts for free. Check the first link in the description. Grüezi miteinander, Gregory von Leberstark here. If this is your first time here on this channel, we are all about kettlebells. So if you are into kettlebells, consider liking the video and subscribing.
He wrote a book back in 1925 called The Secrets of Strength, and it's an awesome book. So you read this book, and if you follow the directions in this book from 1925, you will get far superior results than from most pop fitness and strength programs.
I think this statement is a little bit overblown because we have come a long way by studying and research and understanding the human body, and now we have more information out there. And I think the problem nowadays is because we live in a digital age where we get so much information all at once, it's hard to decipher what is good and what is not. But there's most definitely good stuff out there because we have progressed so far. I have read a couple of books that I can recommend. For example, Basic Barbell Training by Mark Rippetoe is a powerful book. And I've also read The Catechism of Athletics. He describes the strongman and a couple of exercises. Even the pistol squat is in there. Theodor Siebert is his name. And even if we take it a little bit further, when you see what Dr. Krajewski was doing with Pitla, that were responsible for creating a huge catalog of kettlebell exercises in general. It is good stuff that they came up with, but it has been refined. So nowadays you also find good stuff. I think what is highly important is that you have a good level of discernment to know what is good and what is bad stuff.
Yeah. The one more rep thing is it's very embraced here in America, you know, with meatheads, which are my people. The thing about it is that you think that mental toughness is going to push you past your limits or what your perceived limits are, and that's where the real strength happens. That's where the real growth takes place.
And I would say the real growth takes place when it comes to the mental part. When I train intensively with kettlebells, for example, there is always this nagging voice inside me that is telling me to quit. But this voice has been diminished, so it gets quieter and quieter. And what gets louder and louder is my will to survive, so to speak. And I think this is mental toughness and mental clarity and mental focus. What we can also glean from this is, and what I find fascinating when you read Dr. Verkhoshansky's work, is he says that you can tell from an athlete's facial expressions the level of skill. So the idea is to be as quiet as possible. And when you look at the Russian athletes, sometimes you think these guys have ice running through their veins instead of blood because their face is not doing anything. And that's what I'm trying to mimic as well when I train. I'm trying to really keep my face in a calm position to tell my body that it's all good.
That's a very valid point for you mentally, not physically. Mentally, but periodically. This is a very important point. You have to push the body to the limit, whether in competition or some other manner, but for a short period of time and not too often.
And again, this goes for athletes. And I highlighted in the recent video that we sometimes make the mistakes that we take advice from athletes for granted and think that we have to adapt to this. Now, when it comes to pushing the physical limitations, again, like Pavel, I'm a huge fan of the Soviet sciences and how these guys handled it. So they have a couple of periods. I think it is four. The first period, when you start as an athlete, is the general preparatory period. So this is where you just build up your general strength, your general fitness. Number two is the specific or the special preparatory period. This is where you now dive into your sport and learn specifics and skills and specific exercises for your sport. Then you have number three, which is the competitive period. This is where you get built up to the level of where you are competing and getting ready to compete. And then number five is the transitional period. And these 5 periods can sometimes last 15 to 20 years. It's fascinating when you look at the Soviet research because they build you up, they have built you up in a manner where they could guess and estimate based upon your functions and your preparedness and your performance, they could guess, okay, it takes about 6 to 7 or 10 years for this athlete to peak. So then they would walk you through these blocks. And that's another aspect that you see in the late great Louis Simmons, rest in peace. I mentioned him in the recent video as well, and this is something that I find so fascinating, that I have to study Louis Simmons' work more, because he is in line with what Dr. Yuri Verkhoshansky and Dr. Yeses was saying based upon the Soviet research, and that is block training, working according to different blocks and then building you up accordingly. But again, I have to mention, this is what athletes do. And I think what we can glean from athletes is we should not push our bodies always to the top, even if we're not athletes. And even more so, we have to be careful with our body's capacity.
You know who Ronnie Coleman is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ronnie Coleman, who was Mr. Olympia, just at one point in time, one of the most impressive and spectacular physiques on earth, is now so injured from all of his incredible lifts. He was known for lifting enormous amounts of weight. And I mean, I think when they asked him about if we do anything different, because I think he's had, I hope I'm not wrong, but I think more than 11 back surgeries over the last few years.
Yeah.
He's essentially herniated every single disc in his back, and a series of back operations that's left him walking with crutches, and you know, it's bad. But this is the result of this sort of mindset of a champion. You know, that he was...
Joe, pardon me, I'm going to interrupt you for
Please.
a second.
And I want to interrupt right here for a second. And that is, when we talk about Ronnie Coleman, I got some thoughts on this man. And I think that Joe Rogan wanted to complete a sentence that he didn't complete. And that was, Ronnie was asked if he could do it all again, his prep and everything, that ultimately led to his demise, so to speak. Would he do it again? And Ronnie's answer was, yes, I would do it again. And matter of fact, I would take the 10th and 11th rep that I left on the table with X amount of pounds or kilos on my back. I would do this. I would go even further. So that's his statement. And to me, I think that's two things. It's either the mindset of somebody who's always willing to go in and all out and balls to the walls, and doesn't matter, because he or she wants to be the best in their game and wants to, and thinks that they always have to max out on everything. So that might be a mindset. And the other side might be that that's his persona. We know that Ronnie Coleman is the lightweight baby type of guy, and many of us remember watching his videos, which are impressive. If he wants to keep up this persona, maybe he still wants to mention the fact that he would do it all again, because if he would say otherwise, or if he would say it differently, then this would maybe put a dent into his image that he built up over the years. So I think it's either one or the two, or maybe it's another thing. And if you know, or if you have an opinion on Ronnie Coleman's aspect in the situation right now, please let me know down in the comments.
Champion has that mindset on the platform. The champion, whenever the champion is in the gym, he or she is going to approach this as a working man.
And while I agree with Pavel's remarks right here, that a athlete, let's put it like this, that an athlete knows that he or she is not supposed to put everything on the line and max out in the training period if they are not yet in a competition, and that they need to transition and everything. That's what the athlete does if he has the knowledge, right? Yet we cannot now say that champions also do it like this, because certain champions, especially the best ones, probably push their bodies to a limit that is not feasible and not attainable for 99% of athletes in the same genre. And maybe that's the reason why they are champions. And at the same time, I understand his remarks, and I even agree. I don't think you should push yourselves always to the max. Yet, in Ronnie's case, well, that was what made him a champion.
So you will find that absolutely in sports you have to be extremely tough, and you have to model some of that in training as well, but in a very, very careful, timed manner.
Yeah.
So, for instance, top lifters, top power lifters, they max twice a year at the nationals and at the worlds. Meanwhile, they train hard, they push themselves to do everything right, but they do not try to squeeze out one extra rep.
Yet I also have to mention, if you compare powerlifting with bodybuilding, you are comparing apples with oranges. Yes, they both lift weights, but they both have completely different goals. And if you want to build muscle to the max, whether you are on gear or not, doesn't matter. You have to train and approach your workout schedule differently than a powerlifter would.
You have to be tough when it's time. In the gym, you have to do the plan. And like, for example, let's talk about heavy lifting, just heavy singles, let's say. If I'm sure everybody who listens to your program has at what point of their life decided to up their bench press by going to a maximum once a week. I'm sure everybody has.
I have, most definitely.
You have. Everybody has. So how long did it last? Typically 6 weeks for a beginner, and an advanced lifter might tolerate 2 or 3 weeks, and that's about it. So for whatever reasons, after that, your nervous system starts burning out, your endocrine system can't keep up, and that's it. So for that reason, before the competition, you might take like a 90% single or double or something like that. And if you look at the longevity of powerlifters, and if you look at longevity of the weightlifters of the Soviet school, it's very impressive.
Now, I can speak from my experience. I wanted to up my bench press to 110 kilos. I think that's 200 and something pounds. And I did it, and I followed a structured program. And it took me a long time. I don't know what it was. I can't remember. And once I hit it, I felt great. Again, I don't know where he goes with how long did it last. But from my experience, I knew my PR was going well. I had still some energy in the tank. And if I wanted to have this PR last, I knew, and I know now, and even back then, that I would have to always follow this type of strategy and this type of training methodology in order to keep those 200 plus pounds on the bench press. I think you're able to keep up your max if you are approaching it in a sensible manner. This is what I have to do, like Pavel says, and we follow all these periods, and I go through these important periods, and I follow the workout structure to a T and to a plan.
If you also look at the powerlifters, most successful powerlifters, American powerlifters, Eddie Cohn competed for, if I'm not mistaken, about 30 years at the highest level, from a very lightweight class to a much heavier one. And he stayed super healthy throughout. He maybe had one injury. And Eddie right now, years after retirement, is very, very healthy. So you will find that the mentality of saving this eye of the tiger for when it matters, as opposed to treating every training day as a competition, that makes a big difference for performance and for longevity.
And I heard this great podcast that Ed Cohn had with Dr. Stuart McGill and Squat University. And he said, the problem is the following. Most trainees, most lifters, most athletes lift too heavy for too long. And that's what's causing injury. So he's perfectly in line with what Pavel is saying right here. And another thing that he said was, I made everything strong. And that's how I was able to perform and how I was able to stay injury-free. And if we read the Soviet research, the book that I'm reading right now from Dr. Michael Gestes, I love how he puts it. He says, you want to be strong because being strong and owning a lot of strength will reduce your chances to injure yourself and to hurt yourself severely, not only in the gym, but also in daily activities. Stronger ligaments, stronger bones, stronger muscles. That leads to the fact that your injury risk drastically goes down.
Would that approach have worked with a guy like Ronnie Coleman? Because he's a bodybuilder. So bodybuilders, obviously, you're not talking about competition in sense of being able to lift a lot of weight. You're talking about just mass, acquiring mass.
Well, the bodybuilders from the older era, like Franco Colombo, very sad that Dr. Colombo passed recently, but he was an exceptionally strong man, a very healthy man.
He died swimming.
Yeah, but it was a heart issue that has nothing to do with lifting. So he was very healthy and very strong till the end. And if you look at the guys of that generation, they're doing great.
I think one thing that we also have to acknowledge is when it comes to bodybuilding, and I'm not a super professional when it comes to bodybuilding. I just have a bird's eye perspective, and that is the level of gear and the amount of juice that the guys are taking today has just changed completely to what the guys in the 70s in the Schwarzenegger era were using. It is just a completely different ball game, and this leads to the fact that we see young bodybuilders or bodybuilders die young because of various issues which must be correlated, which must have a strong link to the stuff that these guys are taking. I wouldn't put it on the training side as much as I would rather put it on the drugs that these guys today are ingesting into their systems.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, for longevity, you sort of have to have that sort of intelligent approach. So do you think a guy like Ronnie Coleman would have be able to achieve the mass and the size and the way he was built with a different strategy?
I can speculate. I don't know, but I can speculate. But if you look at the muscle mass that have been achieved by heavyweight powerlifters, like Kurt Karwoski, look up that guy.
Kurt Karwoski?
Karwoski, Karwoski. So if you see that type of development achieved by heavyweight powerlifters, then I don't see why not. And bodybuilders have their own additional techniques. They still have to do their stuff for their separation and whatever it is that you do. But I think there's a very good chance that he would have. And if you look at the successful power, like Mike O'Hearn, for example, that's a very strong guy. He's a power bodybuilder. There we go. Here's Karwoski right there.
Jesus Christ, look at the size of that fucking guy. Yeah, he looks like a body, but look at the size of his legs. That is ridiculous.
So when it comes to bodybuilding, my thoughts are that if you would ask me, Gregory, how can I build the maximum amount of muscle? Then you would have to do at least 20 plus sets per muscle group per week. You would have to add in some intensity sets. You would have most definitely, while you are doing these occasional intensity sets, going to the one more rep mentality. Most definitely, you have to jump into this area. Even though it's occasional, you have to do some half reps, some full reps. You have to train the muscle from all different perspectives and angles. This is completely different than what a powerlifter does. Yet with this example that Pavel is showing, it is a fascinating example and makes a great case as to why, for example, Jay Cutler was also able to reach a crazy physique, or Dorian Yates was also able to achieve a monstrous physique. I think he was the guy who reigned in the age of these mass monsters and go balls to the walls and still now live a healthy life. And at the same time, we also have to acknowledge maybe Ronnie Coleman was walking around with a specific DNA that was just susceptible to this kind of training that would lead to these injuries. There's so many factors involved, so it's hard to tell if Ronnie was able to or would have been able to achieve the level of success that he was achieving if he would have done things differently.
Yeah, and that guy just would not fool around with pec, whatever deck and what have you.
Pec deck?
Yeah.
You say that disdainfully. Is that
what do you want me to say
move?
Why don't we just say it with
well,
respect?
A lot of people don't understand what's wrong with it.
And here we go. If you want to maximize muscle growth with your chest, it makes sense to incorporate a pec deck, because then you train your fibers of your chest from an angle that you cannot train with a bench press, for example. You see, I have my thoughts when it comes to bodybuilding, and they have been molded and shaped throughout the years. Yet at the same time, if you want to go down this route, you have to train differently than I train right now. And it's fascinating to see that you are clearly seeing Pavel's disdain for this. And sometimes, and I'm not saying that this happens to Pavel, but sometimes our disdain and things that we don't like starts clouding our judgment in particular and peculiar ways. So here's the next step that you have to do. You have to like the video, consider subscribing and share with a friend, and then go watch this video. This was my first reaction, which the algorithm really likes. So go check it out right now.